pointing finger.
I've got it lifted and I'm ready to point.
We've got it. Better than a fresh, clean start.
Fresh, clean start. Take all that to the dump. That belongs in the dump. Oh, yeah. Where'd that come from?
Run out at the weekend, so this is pretty timely for them. There's also some measures to provide money for schools, etc. But there's also quite a lot of money in here, a couple of $100 billion going towards tax credits for poorer households, and they are quite wide-ranging. The administration is suggesting, we'll see whether this pans out, but it's suggesting that it will cut child poverty in half, which is an enormous claim, really.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of this are quite interesting. The public seem to like it. Republicans completely opposed.
This is politics in some ways getting back to normal. This is them trying to re-establish some ground as the sort of party of fiscal probity, despite the fact that, you know, they presided over around $4 trillion worth of spending during the pandemic themselves. Also, of course, the tax bill before that, it increased the deficit to $1 trillion. And Americans' debt is now at $28 trillion, which is substantially more than 100% of GDP. So they also know there are other things to come before they have to face the electorate, of course. So I think in some ways, this was something they were always going to do at the beginning of a Biden presidency, to try and actually prove perhaps to the administration that they weren't going to get any credit for getting any bipartisan support.
Hey, O'Donoghue inside Congress on Capitol Hill. 2 days after his corruption convictions were overturned, the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has returned to the political stage. Assuming the decision by a Supreme Court judge to clear him isn't reversed, the popular left-wing leader will be able to run for office in 2022, most likely in a divisive battle with the current nationalist president Jair Bolsonaro. And in a passionate speech, Lula wasted no time in blasting his rival's handling of the pandemic.
Quero fazer propaganda pro povo brasileiro. I want to say this so that the Brazilian people do not follow any imbecile decisions by the president or the health minister. Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated, because it is one of the things that can free us of COVID.
Brazil has been badly hit by the virus. Only today it announced a record 2,286 deaths over the past 24 hours. For more on what President Lula had to say, I spoke to our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Camila Motta.
Lula spoke for over an hour. He ranted about the country's situation. He spoke about the pandemic, as Brazil is living through the worst moment of this crisis right now. And during his speech, he took every opportunity to put himself as the antithesis of Bolsonaro, praising science and scientists, defending the freedom of press, arguing that Brazil doesn't need more guns on the hands of common Brazilians, so on and so on.
Yeah, giving voters a clear choice if he decides to run, but he didn't announce that he would. What do you expect?
He didn't. He said it is too early to think about 2022 when presidential elections will be held here in Brazil, but we can definitely say that he spoke like a candidate. He used this conciliatory tone, highlighting he was not angry, even though he felt he was a victim of political persecution. And he even said people shouldn't be scared of him and his left-wing ideology, arguing he's radical only because he wants to get to the roots of Brazil's problems.
And have we had any reaction to the speech, either from the public or from the government?
Oh, yes, many reactions. Of course, the speech was criticized by the right and by Bolsonaro supporters, who keep pointing out to the corruption cases linked to the Workers' Party. As for the left, they are somewhat divided. Some believe Lula should step down and make way for new leadership because his name, even though still very popular, also carries high rejection with part of the constituents, whilst others are thrilled that Lula regained his political rights and think that he's up to the task to run against Bolsonaro and win.
Yeah, I mean, if the election was held now, who would come out on top?
Well, a recent poll released actually a few days ago point out that Lula could win if elections were held right now with 50% of the votes. But we know that a lot can change on the current scenario until we get to 2022. That's valid for most countries and especially for Brazil.
Camilla Motta in Sao Paulo. In recent days and weeks, the armed forces in Myanmar have tried a range of tactics to try to quash opposition to the coup. More than 60 protesters have been shot dead and many hundred have been detained. Now soldiers have been expelling the families of striking railway workers from their state-owned accommodation to try to break up a general strike. This activist, for safety reasons, helped workers escape from soldiers at a compound in Yangon.
The people were so frightened. All they know was they had to leave as soon as possible. There were lots of elders who can't even walk. So we had to move them with carts, not wheelchairs. They were so scared that they don't know what to do anymore. Most of us, probably all of us, were expecting the United Nations or international governments to help us as much as they can, because we need your help right now.
Well, after failing to agree a statement on Tuesday, the UN Security Council has now called on the army to show restraint. But China and Russia blocked calls for tougher diplomatic action. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Head is in Bangkok, where he's been monitoring events in Myanmar.
It's difficult to come up with any other word for it than just terrorizing neighborhoods, but also trying to capture as many people as possible. We've got around 2,000 people now detained since the coup. As we speak, there are running confrontations going on in two hotspots in Yangon, in North Okalapa Township and also in Sanchong, where that siege took place a couple of nights ago. It looks like the military and police are trying to go in and arrest people, and they're being confronted by local residents. They're trying to dismantle barriers. It's quite extraordinary to see this going on day after day, and you're wondering which side will become exhausted first. But the gradual ramping up of violence will have to take its toll. I'm sure the military is calculating that the more violence they inflict on people, the more they torment them with these nightly raids, the more likely it is that some people will just say, we've had enough, we can't go on. What we've seen, the language we've seen the police use and the army, the way they've treated people they've captured, and when we've seen the police summarily execute one man they caught in front of a camera caught it from a distance. We've seen them beat people dreadfully, in a way where they must have been awfully injured, and we simply don't know what's going on behind the walls where these people are being detained. But we are getting a steadily increasing number of people who are going into detention, and their families are being told to come and pick up their bodies the next day. In that kind of environment, it's inevitable some people will resist, but of course it's very difficult for either the police or military to resist. Those who do are punished very severely, and their families are punished too. So I don't expect we'll see that many defections.
Jonathan Head. Right, let's take a look at some of the day's other news with Sue.
The US Senate has confirmed Merrick Garland as President Biden's Attorney General. 20 Republicans sided with Democrats, including Mitch McConnell, who, as the Senate Majority Leader in 2016, blocked Judge Garland as President Obama's nominee to sit on the Supreme Court. Merrick Garland told his confirmation hearing that he would protect the Justice Department from political meddling and said fighting domestic terrorism would be a priority. Norway's parliament has been hit by a cyber attack for the second time in less than a year. In a statement, it said it wasn't yet clear who was behind the attack, in which an as yet unknown amount of data was extracted. The parliament said hackers had targeted a vulnerability in its Microsoft Exchange email system. A Chinese airline has suspended a captain and a flight attendant after they were allegedly involved in a mid-air brawl over lavatory protocols that ended with a broken bone and a missing tooth. The country's Civil Aviation Authority began an investigation into the fight between the two men in front of first-class passengers on a Donghai airline service traveling from the eastern city of Nantong to Xi'an in central China.
Well, staying in China, cleaning has become an understandable obsession during the pandemic. Now, several Chinese hotels are trialing technology to make sure that rigorous hygiene standards are maintained. It's caused a stir on social media because it involves microchips in hotel room furniture and even bed sheets. Our China media analyst Carrie Allen told us more.
There's a pilot project underway in 12 hotels in a city called Hangzhou in the east of China. And this project involves supervising how clean hotel rooms are using smart technologies. So cleaning tools and bed frames are being installed with an electronic chip, and this registers if they are being used correctly. So there are certain chips on certain tools, and if a cloth has been used on, say, the toilet, and then it's used in another area, there will be a warning sound, and the Global Times newspaper says that this data will be kept on record. Now, there's a lot of debate about this. Obviously, it's received some criticism that cleaners who are on a low pay could find themselves under increased scrutiny when they're doing their work. And some people on Chinese social media say they'd feel nervous about staying in a hotel room that used this technology because of their own concerns about privacy or surveillance. As we know as well, technology can sometimes go wrong. But some people think that in principle, this tech is a good thing. They think it could be used to ensure that hotels are safe and clean. And as China is pretty much free of the coronavirus, it would mean that quarantine hotels have a system in place that means that they can stay clean and COVID-19 doesn't re-enter the country.
Kerry Allen. NASA has released the first sounds of a laser being fired on another planet, Mars. Don't worry, it wasn't a Martian ray gun. It was the latest experiment by the Perseverance rover. Researchers say that by listening to the laser through an onboard microphone, they can gain extra insight into the rocks on the planet. Here's Jonathan Amos.
Granted, it's not the most exciting sound, but these staccato pops were recorded 150 million miles from Earth on Mars. NASA's new Perseverance rover has a laser that will fire at rocks at a distance and determine what they're made of. It's critical information as the robot goes about its mission to search for signs of ancient life on the red planet. But while the laser will reveal chemical composition, there are further details about the physical properties that scientists want. And that's where the rover's microphone comes in. The zapping noise will be different depending on the hardness of rocks. For example, chalk and marble may be chemically the same, but they're very different to the touch. Since the first surface missions in the 1970s, we've been shown thousands of still images of Mars. But Perseverance is bringing us a new multimedia experience, with short videos and sounds like that of the wind, which almost make us believe we could be there.
That report by Jonathan Amos. Our main world news again. The US Congress has approved President Biden's massive COVID stimulus package worth $1.9 trillion. That's it for now from the newsroom.
Well, sport from the BBC with me, Paul Serres. Coming up in the next 10 minutes.
Here's De Bruyne walking his way through, and De Bruyne scores. And Manchester City have re-established their 3-goal cushion, 5-2.
Manchester City dominate against Southampton in the English Premier.
You know, and having the faith in my back and at this time, it's nice to have the support. We're all in this together, as they say. You got it. Ron James, and again, ronjames.ca, and you can pick up tickets for his concert on the 21st via Zoom. Thank you, Ronnie, as always. Good luck. We will talk again down the road. Let's get to our panel topics worthy of discussion. Ernie Eaves, Dan Moulton, just a moment or two away on the Oprah Show. 20 past, first we'll back out to the roads, and a check of chopper traffic. Ari Rabinovich.
And hearing of a new collision on the northbound Dove LA Parkway near Eglinton, blocking the right lane, so it's going to add to some delays before. And also
AGG Eglinton.
Unrest is brewing in many Middle Eastern and North African countries, and it's mainly coming from young people who want security and a better future. UNICEF says around half of the region's population are under 24. That's at least 200 million people. Yet, depending on the country, up to a third of those aged between 15 and 24 are jobless, and the figure is much higher when it comes to women. So they too are out on the streets, voicing their anger and demanding their right to freedom and self-determination.
The mirror doesn't always reflect such a smiling face. There are days when Wafa Al-Najibi is tearful and despairing. But however she feels, she never gives up. She keeps fighting for her dream of being a singer and living a free, self-determined life in Gaza. The videos she posts on Facebook show a talented young woman with a voice crying out to be heard. But it's a voice that Gaza's macho Islamist society wants to silence.
One of my cousins called my dad. Your daughter, she's a singer, huh? And she putting her photos on Facebook and her songs. Where do you think that we're living? In America? We're in Gaza. You have to stop her.
It's bad enough that Wafa sings. The fact that she sings in English is considered an outrage.
Really? Really?
Her detractors say she looks Western. Her headscarf doesn't hide her hairline. She's 27 and unmarried, but she doesn't live with her parents. And she's not afraid to speak her mind.
I don't feel that it's my country, and I want to stay here and have this freaking word every year, and I have to defend, but my country, and
You should come to Toronto.
I just wanna
Stay away from the
be
water.
myself, live freely, and sing, and have my own life, my own job. No fear, just peace, love, happiness.
Wafa rents a small room in Gaza City. She's a nurse, but hasn't been able to find a job. Gaza's economy is in a state of collapse.
Whoa.
She gets by with odd jobs, but worries constantly that she won't be able to afford her independence for much longer.
Actually, I'm so happy because I'm alone. Yeah, I kind of independent, and I have my own work, and I have my own space.
Alone, but not lonely. Wafa's friend Mohammed is also a musician. This is the first time he's ever visited her at home. Here in Gaza, being together unchaperoned is out of the question.
I just put my face in his face, and we're just like one person. Like he's my soulmate. This is what that means.
Mohammed plays in a band. He gave Wafa this guitar as a gift. His parents don't think much of his musical talent, but he lives for his music. In their opinion, it's a waste of time.
Once, when I was away, they destroyed all my instruments.
His family refused me completely. His dad refused. He said, no, not this girl. She's a singer. She's open-minded person. She's not good girl for you. Don't get engaged.
Wow.
You can find another girl, but not her.
But Mohammed doesn't want to find another girl.
بدك واحدة تانية؟ No.
Unlike Mohammed's parents, Wafa's family doesn't have a problem with their music. They're on their way to visit her family. They live in Rafah, a town in the southern Gaza Strip. Rafah is a highly dangerous place. It's a bastion of Islamist militants, and the majority of the population live in abject poverty. In Gaza City, we were allowed to film from our car, but when we drive into Rafah, we're immediately stopped by the police. To live in Gaza is to live in fear.
My dad. This is your father? Yeah, this is my father. It's such a honor seeing you.
Wafa's father quickly ushers us inside. He doesn't want the neighbors to see us. The whole family is viewed with suspicion. They're all musicians, and that makes them outsiders.
Wow.
Wafa's father is well known. Decades ago, he won a talent contest in Israel and performed in Haifa and Tel Aviv.
You know, those
But that
musicians
was
always
in
getting
another
up to
lifetime,
some sort of
before
suspicious
travel
activity.
restrictions were imposed on residents of Gaza, before Hamas took control in 2007, and Israel and Egypt imposed the blockade of Gaza Strip, before life became a waking nightmare. Wafa's father remembers the time when music brought people
this is a virus we can for the foreseeable future. I think that's when you have to start to have a conversation about how do we, in particular in large events and festivals and major gatherings, think through what it means to only allow those that are vaccinated. And I think that's the moment when it makes the most sense. Right now, it's a little premature. We're still trying to prioritize those that may need the vaccine the most. I'm not sure we're at a point where vaccine passports are really making a lot of sense yet.
Well, they're working on it in France. In France, I guess it's for travel as much as, again, as you cited, they want to open things up. And this seems to be the only practical way that they can approach it. And here, Ernie, let me ask you that in Ontario, when you've even got members of the health table, like Nathan Stahl, who's a geriatrician at Sinai Health in Toronto, he's saying, I don't think we should be committing the entire population to the same restrictions, because not everyone has had the opportunity to be vaccinated. Like, let's open things up and grant special dispensation to people who have been vaccinated. That makes sense to you?
Well, it kind of does, but as Dan has said, first of all, I think we're a long way from having a substantial proportion of the population vaccinated. Second of all, you know, the second dose of the vaccine now is probably going to be delayed substantially in some cases, so you may have as long as 4 months in between doses, and you're not totally protected with the effect of the vaccine if you don't, you know, you haven't had your second dose, number one, in many cases, and secondly, you're still not fully protected till I think it's a couple of weeks after your second one.
Right.
There's some debate as to how much protection you have after the first one. There's still debate as to whether, even though you're vaccinated, you can spread the vaccine to others.
A candle, a moment of real hope that maybe one day we would be able to live alongside this virus.
And the doctors and nurses on the medical front line that work for almost a year treating patients sick with COVID-19 will continue in a difficult and exhaustive fight to save as many lives as we can.
Humanity has somehow become more hopeful after this.
OS Conversations, Resilience During a Year of the Pandemic. Sunday at 14 GMT.
Coming up in World Business Report in just a moment, we'll head to the United States, where President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus plan was passed just a short while ago. We'll assess what its impact will be on the US and the wider global economy. And we'll be diving into the Indian Ocean, where an argument has broken out over stocks of yellowfin tuna. Before we head around the world, let's go to the BBC newsroom now to get the very latest BBC News.
BBC News. President Biden has scored an important victory after just 50 days in office, with the House of Representatives approving his COVID stimulus package.
Things that we need to take into consideration.
She's dancing the role of the Snow Queen.
Part of a campaign to rein in overuse of antibiotics. These valuable drugs can lose their power to cure disease if they are used excessively. Richard Harris, NPR News.
In Atlanta, researchers say ethnic and racial disparities in young people infected by the coronavirus diminished over the course of 2020. Meanwhile, the infection rate increased among white Americans under age 25. From member station WABE, Sam Whitehead reports.
In a new report, CDC researchers link the higher incidence of COVID-19 among communities of color early in the year to their overrepresentation in essential jobs and a higher likelihood of living in multi-generation housing. Researchers say the disparities decreased over time, but still show the need for equitable access to coronavirus testing and vaccinations.
The viral pandemic has swept away tens of millions of jobs. Economists say at least 30% of those jobs lost to the pandemic are not expected to come back. A sizable portion of them are in hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues. Stocks finished mixed on Wall Street. This is NPR.
What does that mean?
The Des Moines, Iowa reporter arrested during a racial justice protest last summer has been found not guilty of violating police orders. From Iowa Public Radio, Grant Gerlach reports.
Andrea Sohori of the Des Moines Register was covering a protest at a shopping mall that turned violent. She testified she was pepper sprayed and arrested while moving away from police. Her defense attorneys told the jury she was there to do her job, just as officers were there to protect property. Sohori says she's glad the jury recognized that.
You know, I'm really, really grateful for them that they upheld freedom of the press and, of course, you know, a just democracy.
The Register's executive editor thanked the jury in a statement, saying arresting reporters at protests denies people the right to know what's happening in their community. For NPR News, I'm Grant Gerlach in Des Moines.
As spring break approaches, the University of California, Davis is offering students a financial incentive to avoid non-essential travel. Students who choose to stay home during spring break will get $75 in gift cards. School officials say the response has been great and it will help students follow public health guidance. About 50% of UC Davis students live either on campus or in the area. They must pledge to stay in town for their week-long break and complete a coronavirus test. Stocks finished mixed on Wall Street. The Dow gained 464 points, up almost 1.5%. This is NPR News.
I don't understand why the province isn't taking an approach that more factors workplaces and family doctors into this conversation, because those are the two sort of categories that we're talking about being most prevalent for phase two. So why not, you know, bring Loblaw and other grocery stores and other retailers into the conversation about vaccinating their employees, and bring family doctors who can, you know, bring in patients for appointments that have pre-existing conditions. I'm not sure their approach here. When you open mass vaccination clinics and then say only certain people can come,
I've been speaking to Rabila Faruqi, chief U.S. economist at High Frequency.
What we are looking at is a tremendous amount of aid that is going to flow through a $1.9 trillion stimulus or aid bill, as I prefer to call it. And I think front and center of that will be the $1,400 direct payments that will be made to low-income households, and enhanced unemployment benefits in the amount of $300 per week. That is going to provide a huge amount of support to a lot of unemployed people, because if you look at the labor market, we are very far away from normal levels of payrolls.
I suppose a question that many economists are asking is, when that money is distributed to Americans, will it all be spent, or because of concerns about the future, will it be saved?
If you look at what happened after the checks went out last year and after the checks went out in January, there is a tendency for some of that to go into savings, because there is still a concern where 9.5 million, you know, in the hole on jobs. So some of that is going to happen. But what we saw in retail sales and in household spending numbers in January, we expect to see an even bigger bounce in March. We are setting up for spectacular growth numbers that are going to appear probably sooner than we were expecting, first and second quarters, just because we are opening more quickly, vaccines are rolling out, infection rates are falling, and I expect job growth is going to pick up quite a bit because of it as businesses come back online.
We're looking at many economies across the world being more divided between the haves and the have-nots. President Biden got a lot of what he wanted in this 628-page bill. He didn't, though, get that minimum wage through, did he, at $15?
I don't think he's going to back away from that. I think he has a very practical mindset in terms of how he's looking at this. He was very focused on this bill. He wanted to get it through quickly before current measures expired. And the only way to do that was to give up something. I don't think he's backed away from it. I think $15 may not be where we end up, but I think he is going to push for it.
What is very important in here, and something fairly new when we're looking at the US system, is child tax credits. Are we, do you think, looking at a new relationship that's developing between low-income parents and the government in the United States? This is something that's set to continue.
That's a very hard question to answer. I do know that this administration is very focused on, you know, doing everything possible to lower inequalities, even though, you know, it's not the Fed's mandate, but the labor market is, and that's what they're going to focus on. The focus is correct, and it's going to make a tremendous difference to low-income households in particular, because typically recessions don't end up like this, where you actually are supporting or replacing incomes for low-income households. So I think this is a unique experience. It's hard to say whether that's going to continue over coming years.
We're seeing some predictions that the U.S. economy is going to have the largest growth rate now that we've seen since the Korean War. And that's important for the global economy as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, we do think we are looking at exceptional growth numbers. I'm above 6%, close to 6.5%, and for 2021, and still pretty good growth rate next year as well. And I think just if you look at what happened with imports after shutdowns were lifted last year, that can be a locomotive for global growth.
Rubila Faruqi with an analysis of the stimulus bill. So how has it gone down with the markets? Here's Susan Schmidt from Aviva Investors.
The markets are very happy that the stimulus bill is now effectively signed, sealed, and delivered. The market definitely views this as supportive of growth and a resumption of normalcy in the economy as we move through the pandemic and have this fiscal stimulus to help us get to the end of the pandemic. That's important because now you see investors continue to look to other business models away from technology to diversify their holdings and also move to businesses and companies that are more impacted by that economic cycle.
Are we going to see now an end to the sort of volatility that we've been seeing with the NASDAQ up 4%, just yesterday? Is that volatility going to end a little bit now, do you think?
I don't think it is. And that's because I'm always cautious. Investors should be wary of volatility. Investors in the market are having a debate within themselves. Is inflation here, or are we seeing good, steady growth? And that's a challenge for the market, because if it is inflationary, then they want to discount growth. If it's not inflationary and the numbers that we see increases in overall rates because the market is doing better and because the economy is doing better, then you're in a very positive position. So there's that glass half full, glass half empty attitude that I think institutional investors in the U.S. market are going to continue to wrestle with for the next several months.
Internally with themselves.
Susan Schmidt, they're casting her eye over the markets for us. Let's have a look at some of those numbers. The Dow was up 1.46% at 32,297. The Nasdaq,
one of nature's most powerful forces. And now, OLG has taken lightning and turned it into a lottery. We call it Lightning Lotto. A $125,000 jackpot keeps growing.
David Scott of Georgia is a Democrat and chair of the House Agriculture Committee. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Harry, for having me.
Some scientists are concerned the COVID-19 pandemic could also contribute to another significant health problem, the overuse of antibiotics, which will erode their power to cure disease. Several studies show antibiotics were heavily used, especially during the early days of COVID, even though these drugs are not effective against viruses. NPR science correspondent Richard Harris reports.
Infectious disease specialists have been watching with alarm as antibiotics lose their punch. Tens of thousands of people in the United States die every year from dangerous drug-resistant infections. But doctors, of course, faced another urgent threat last year, COVID-19. And Dr. Susan Swindles at the University of Nebraska Medical Center says they often reached for antibiotics.
You have a patient in front of you with this potentially lethal illness, and they have a fever and a cough, and they have difficulty breathing, and so the overwhelming desire is to just do whatever you can.
Some patients got treated just in case they actually had bacterial pneumonia, not COVID. Other times, doctors figured patients might have both COVID and a bacterial infection. That's fairly common with the flu. Rachel Zetz at the Pew Charitable Trusts co-authored a new study that documented this trend in a group of about 5,000 patients, chiefly in the Midwest.
Very high levels of antibiotic prescribing occurring within this population, particularly when compared to what we suspect the levels of bacterial infections is.
More than half of the people included in their study got antibiotics, even though most of them did not have bacterial infections. Her co-author, Dr. David Hyun, says people usually got the antibiotics right away before doctors had time to run tests to rule out bacterial infections.
not inherently a bad practice. It's a necessary tool for providers to treat patients with suspected bacterial infections when they hit the doors of the hospital.
Immediate treatment can save the life of someone with sepsis, for example. But as the pandemic evolved, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't helping most COVID patients. Doctors usually discontinued therapy within a few days once they realized their patients wouldn't benefit. But still, this practice contributes to overuse of antibiotics and can gradually erode their potency. Hyun says hospitals had in recent years been compelled to adopt guidelines to rein in inappropriate antibiotic use.
What we're concerned about is that those progresses that we've seen in the last few years could reverse.
Now, these findings mostly apply to medical practice in the first 6 months of the pandemic. Since then, doctors have had effective drugs to reach for and have learned that their patients rarely get secondary bacterial infections. Dr. Swindles says in her hospital, that's reduced the impulse to reach for antibiotics.
It's still going on to a certain extent, but improved.
Researchers at PU are eager to see results from follow-up studies. Richard Harris, NPR News.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. Advocates for sexual assault survivors are cheering a move by the Biden administration to change the ways cases of sexual assault and harassment are handled by schools. Acting on a campaign promise, President Biden has ordered education officials to start considering how to roll back Trump administration rules that bolster the rights of the accused. NPR's Tovia Smith reports.
It's only been about half a year since the Trump administration enacted its rules in place of the Obama administration's, and now President Biden is about to flip things again.
We're buckling up for what comes next.
Sage Carson from the Title IX advocacy group called Know Your Nine says an administration official told her they're working with intentional urgency to roll back the rules that Biden has called an effort to shame and silence survivors. The regulations exempt schools from having to respond to many off-campus incidents, and they narrow the definition of sexual harassment. They also beef up due process protections for accused students, for example, by allowing schools to require more evidence and by mandating live hearings with cross-examination through a third party. Carson says those changes are a gross overcorrection.
This goes beyond what is required. These were special rights just for students accused of sexual misconduct, stacked to the decks against student survivors.
Carson says the new rules are already having a chilling effect, making survivors less willing to report. But for all those like her expressing relief at the promise of change, there's fear on the other side from those who believe accused students will be presumed guilty. Among those is defense attorney Patricia Hamill.
Students, rightly so, are concerned that there will be a rollback to an era with no live hearings, no ability to really probe the other person's narrative. And I think those are all great concerns for students who are accused of what is a very serious and significant misconduct, and it can have lifelong consequences.
The administration will not be able to easily ditch the regulations, and will fight tooth and nail to make sure that they don't.
Joe Cohn with the civil liberties advocacy group known as FIRE says federal courts have clearly affirmed students' due process rights, and the Biden administration will be limited in how much they can change. Change is also likely to be slow. While the Obama administration issued guidance, the current rules went through a much more laborious process to become official regulations. So any effort to change them will also have to do the same and would likely take more than a year.
This is going to be a long march. This is a huge undertaking.
Terry Hartle is with the American Council on Education, a trade group of colleges and universities which objects to the Trump administration rules. Hartle says they not only work against survivors, but they're also unworkable for schools who are not equipped to play the part of courts.
We're not judicial bodies. These are campus officials not trained to navigate these sort of quasi-legal disputes.
Equally importantly, schools want the issues settled once and for all so policies don't keep flipping back and forth with each administration. Some say the only way to do that is to get broader buy-in from the start. Even in these politically charged times, they say it can and has been done. Just a few years ago, a small group of advocates for survivors, the accused, and schools all sat down together, and within a few months, they had hashed out a set of rules they were all willing to endorse. Tovia Smith, NPR News.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News.
By governments of all orders, federal, provincial, to step in and support those sectors.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because Lisa McLeod went on to say that there'd be financial supports for the Ontario Hockey League. And I just wanted to broaden the context, because we understand, Ernie, you cited the draft dates. It's set for July 23rd and 24th. And for a lot of young men, this is sort of a stepping stone to a professional career. And so it's given sort of that added cachet of importance. But the return to play plan, just in general, as Dan and I were discussing now, getting kids out of the house, getting them into active leagues, you know, where they're playing competitively or otherwise, that's been denied of them. What do you think it's going to take to make a cogent return to play plan for whether it's, you know, girls soccer, boys baseball, right across the board, all of these things to get going again? What would be the necessary requirements or criteria?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important these young people. I totally agree with Dan. I think it's very important these young people are able to get back to doing what they would normally do in terms of socializing, whether it's sport, art, whatever. I think it's very important for their mental outlook, and I think it's important for them to socialize with people in their own age group, and just part of human nature. The more difficult question is what criteria is the one you just asked. What criteria do you have to have in place before you're allowed to do that? And I would.
Are not teenagers. They're not even people in their 20s. For me, there's been a shift mine through Zoom lessons, and I've also started giving lectures, but what I live.
And this time round, I'm asking everyone, what's the one piece of music you listen to when you want to feel some optimism about the future?
Dead. Ellie Griffiths is the author of The Postscript Murders. Joins us from Brighton, England. Welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you with us, and alive and well at that. So start with Peggy. She is the 90-year-old woman who dies in the very first pages, but she hangs over the whole book, and I want you to set the stage and tell us why.
Well, one day Peggy's found dead, and of course it's very sad, but not seen as terribly suspicious. But then her carer, Natalka, starts to find these crime novels in Peggy's flat when she's clearing it out. And of course, very suspicious to have all those crime novels at all. But then she finds out that a lot of them are dedicated to Peggy, and a lot of them say, P.S. Thanks for the murders. And it turns out that Peggy was employed by crime writers to think up murders for them. And in fact, she was a murder consultant. The carer finds this rather strange business card with the word murder consultant written on it. And I have to say that I slightly got the inspiration from my own aunt, who lives in a seaside apartment on the south coast. And when she moved there a few years ago, I don't know what it was about the new location. I don't know, maybe it was the sea air. But my aunt suddenly started coming up with these amazing murder plots for me. And she would ring me up and say, oh, hello, love, I've thought of another good murder for you. And I started to think, well, what if there was such a thing as a murder consultant? And what if that murder consultant was like my aunt, who I hasten to say is alive and well, What if that murder consultant was an ultra respectable lady living on the south coast of England? So that's really where Peggy Smith started from.
Somebody wrote a book about paying somebody
to stay with that.
to
What,
give
what
them
is the
stories
craziest
to write a
plot twist
book.
that you're
Wow, damn it.
She came up with a very good murder for one of my Dr. Ruth Galloway books that
I'll
involved
pay somebody to pay somebody else to write the book.
And I do remember the book was reviewed in the Financial Times in a really nice review, but they also said it contains one of the nastiest uses.
Uh-oh. Uses of what? Oh, dear.
Yes, nigga. Word take up. We slim. We all here. Don't get close, nigga. We the critics, not the shooters behind me. FOGs the white, the 70s and 90s. So don't sleep, no, nigga. We are one. Won't matter who it is, bound to get the job done. We the critics, got the shooters behind me. FOGs the white, the 70s and 90s. So don't sleep, nigga. We are one. Don't matter who it is, bound to get the job done. On the same stage, with the same click, never gonna change. No, nigga, only change shows. And the pool, but only if it's fucking up. Place some aim and niggas above the button. I'm hard in the paint, no patch of fucking up. Repack the clip, that to get our shit up. Rack it up, the other option is a stick up. Never a 9 to 5, cause I ain't got no day job. From the slums, little homie, where we play hard. If you don't wanna see the 30-30 when it sprays on. 20 people walk around 3/8 for the beat. The 40 to lay them down, the max for the DC. Heard niggas saying, but they wanna make tracks with us. Before that, didn't even crack to us. Going hard in the booth, it's a takeover. Hard and the ground into your face, that's a makeover. 2 and 5 for a Q. The rest profit. Hustlers mind say won't sleep till I knock it. And don't push me, cause I ain't in the top yet. 12-year-old fool, so I ain't scared if you got it. Y'all got it. Is it me you comparing to? I ain't finished my fair share yet, but I aired them just started. And I ain't talking about no jump shot. Brush them off, go top. You know the cold hurt my chest. Didn't think I was capable. 4-5 pipe on my traceable. Didn't think I was capable. 4-5 pipe on my it isn't traceable.
You niggas don't ride something like a flat tire. Aim a fire at your back and with the backfire. Cause my gas the same size as a blow dryer. Never true in your raps with some damn liars. Break jobs, make them spit through the wire. And you don't supply shit, you a buyer. I'm the king again, rap Connie Sire. That's hate for piping in you rate and admire. Tell the truth, your rubber grip tight, no pliers. I gotta take you out, probably quit, so retire. The 4th room down, 5th lift them up. Bells don't leave shouts, so I'm switching up. Do something like a bus driver still picking up. Got your hands in your pocket, nigga, stick them out. On the projects, money's no objects. So we finger fuck max and we contact. Slide in, slide out, duck when we ride out. Down go, I buck rounds at you dumb clowns. You're standing up till I tell them sit down. Stomach on the ground, hands behind your back and you're going over. When I'm digging in your pants, see me that in your grip. All for the rest. He said, get the weed, need the cash. What? I'ma do him dirty, Mad Max. Do it, niggas get back. Bitches get smacked and get smacked face down when I'm breaking her back. Yo, we got metal like a rap, made a name in rap. I ain't setting it for trap, never. Yo, I'ma need me a bag that C-O-L-T. Carved in my rap, steel unstolen. Stereo scratch, sleep on my actions. Stop the madness, I'm reeling up, get it gone. Mad shit, they can't go sleep like I don't got a night joke. Tell your aim class, didn't see wrong. Now run up on them close. I ain't doing wrong, but I'm clear blood strong till it jumps on my palm. And it time's dangerous and no to me arms are dangerous. Sicker than stars, I ain't saying this, but I'm a hot star. Off snap, crack, pop like camera. Off snap, run, duck, just hide when I let off. Run man in the mask, man in the act, man with the strap to your man's vision black. With the phone dog and off snap, on the G's for YGs, scroll clap, we clap. Do you come and try me? 70s and 90s, been moving grimy. Blood rush till they hooked up to the ivy.
4-5 will stretch you, and they think it's drunk. Until they end up on a stretcher, better get a coffin. Yo, Critians, so we ain't in the no long talking. Money overflow, back on my bullshit. These pumps that I grew with, acting like they're too sick, too so cash making me ever switch sides. I babble to the jigs, almost get my guns fried. My mind's fried. See, I don't give a fuck. Skank it with a YG. Guarantee we hit them up. Take a nigga slut. Man, you know me. Never look back since my first stack in 03. Pack nigga. Plus I get busy with these OGs. Screaming Southside, outside. All the police. Fucked up when I nipped 1.5 a beat. Snakes and their cop chops. Now you owe me 10 J's. Till I go to sleep. Till you for the ABK. The marksman. Shoot for fun. What the fuck's a murder one? Bad news if you run into the DBS. All I do is give one nod. Then he breathes the text. Then he breathes the tech. All I do is give one nod, then he breathes the tech. We the Canadians are the shooters behind me. OGs the YY, the 70s, the 990s. So don't sleep, no, nigga, we are one. Won't matter who it is, bound to get the job done. We the Canadians got the shooters behind me. OGs the YY, the 70s, the 990s. So don't sleep, nigga, we are one. Won't matter who it is, bound to get the job done.
This week, this receives federal funding to intervene in the environmental assessment of the Valentine Lake megabine. And after 21 years of waiting for Canada to implement a commercial decision, or threatening fisheries conservation. But who wastes the most lobster? Who was convicted of violations of fisheries regulations? Step up, Clearwater.
Yeah. Certain man gotta fix up quick. In general. Are you dumb? Bad or who, when, where, never. I let my dread hang, put 12K from my D-back. If you're shorty fiending, then I might just have to fix. I'm the shopper's drug mark booming in the 6. How you get it out the mud? Community housing. North side of the Rex, places you weren't allowed in. Bitches used to laugh at the kid, not want to see me. Told her put these on so you can see me coming in 3D. First coming to the money, you looking like Bueller. You figures not for everybody, I had to maneuver. You were shooting for the stars, I was not where they were shooting. I go pop the builder for the fix up, if you acting funny. Yeah. Are you dumb? Certain man get crushed on road and keep it hush. A nigga wrote a statement on me, who can I trust? My mom's not in a women's shelter, it was just us. A man trying to come for the kid, I told him head back. Before they start aiming at your head back. You get that? Backhand the back of your head, they'll tell you head back. They wanna let they sick in the head, but then we dead there. I'm trying to put a foreign on road, and then we head that. Going down like Titanic, it's high, find where her head at. Keep a young mind with me, that will make you say, or one to the west, bumping that day east. In my city, little nigga, I'm a don like you. She wanna be my playboy bunny, I guess I'm you. I came from the Rex where they good with the text. SMS got a text, now your wife giving neck. Are you dumb? It's don't get close, so we the gang. It's don't get close, you will get smoked, you cannot hang. I'll shoot his neck, I'll shoot his chest, I'll shoot his bangs. It's don't get close, so we the gang. Rolled up, be the hardest stone, y'all butter sock. Block party turning up, to the dogs busted up. All of them we cockle up, see him and they nodding back. Matching if I had a map, know what I would do to us. So on the clock, I'll be bringing back the Holocaust. Hit him up, long distance, no calling. When I pop it up, treat me like a movie star. Now she wanna know me cause I'm back from the metal bar. Cocaine white, like I'm walking around with cotton buds. Treat it like an acrobat, flip it and I'm stretching down. Niggas talking like they G, all they do is rap beat. Talking all that shit up been on Smack DVD. Certain man get crushed on road and keep it hush. Certain man get crushed on road and keep it hush. Battle who, when, where, never. Are you dumb?
bother with the buttons. Pushing buttons doesn't work properly. What the hell is that sound?
If you rest the team dying on your set me high. Lick shots, nigga, rep your block. You ain't a man, yeah, best be holding your tongue. The bloody north where the soldiers is from. If you rep the team dying on your set me high. Lick shots, nigga, rep your block. You ain't a man, yeah, best be holding your tongue. The bloody north where the soldiers is from.
3, 5, 7 to Mac 11s, keep stepping, cock your weapon and stop yelling if you rep 47. I got niggas in the front ready and willing to split you down the middle just like a blunt, so rock but not with me. The Lord will not forgive me for shaking up your kidney, cause you faking and Disney. My niggas lippy and shifty, pissy, really iggy, shiggy. We don't give a wiggy. What really trying to kill the city like crack in the 80s. I'm ready to burn in Hades. My doctor infected with rabies. Not even my barber can fit me. You niggas is crazy. Fuck a fight and learn what these talents do. You could be as cuckoo as you are. I'm unbalanced too. Fixing the garden, I'm coming to rattle you. To splatter you, run you off in your avenue while I laugh at you. The chronic audition, demented ruptures. My figment of the appearance igneous. Run you up the district.
If you rep the team dying on your set me high. Lick shots, nigga, rep your block. You ain't a man, yeah, best be holding your tongue. The bloody north where the soldiers is from. If you rep the team dying on your set me high. Lick shots, nigga, rep your block. You ain't a man, yeah, best be holding your tongue. The bloody north where the soldiers is from. Star City where we blast shots. Then in the last block, man mentality, cause all of us niggas ass rocks. Over big game, always severely cash crops. Money growing trees, just turn the coke, leave the crack rock. Find a block, dedicated, keep it padlocked. Innocent animals, watch your dog, jealous rats talk. You pack glocks, you smoke weed with hair like Sasquatch. Fuck my niggas, dog, your son to think you out of the sandbox. Better yet, I crash your plane, spit on the black box. Because he's highly trained on cocaine, higher than that plug, that up. You with more clips is, for instance, the same equivalent as a bed nailing the insects. Ridiculous. Most cats is sweet like licorice. I eat they food fast, smoke niggas similar to cigarettes. You dig me yet? Better cash, get burned the ass up, belong to burn the fast. Believe you colder than the NUJ. You rep the team dying on your set me high. Lick shots, nigga, rep your block. You ain't a man, yeah, best be holding your tongue. The bloody north where the soldiers is from. You rep the team dying on your set me high. Lick shots, nigga, rep your block. You ain't a man, yeah, best be holding your tongue. The bloody north where the soldiers is from.
I'm from the city where they keep it gully. I'm pretty niggas robbing out of city niggas, homie. Checking trees, but it's screwed by the old trees. All we do is old cheese, old sleeves. It's a long time like the little niggas. Pushing niggas bleed when they fuck with me. Turn like a track star when they fuck with me. But I put shots on me. I got the hollows for the cops on me. I'm so real in the hood, they call me absent still. Beside my absence still, I make you feel still in your abs for real. Cook like a gourmet chef. Perfection, see my throat close, stack up direction. It's right, shine, get the love, my nose. The whole thing, I'm just Mississauga. It makes no sense, and it makes clear here. Everything probably said earlier this afternoon, and it's all between cities like Oakville and Milton and Markham, so you're in home friends around you. Basically makes it huge if they are the only ones in Korea.
Did we just say mute?
And willing to communicate that this is the position of our local leadership, at least in one of the municipalities. I think it will form part of our ongoing conversation and discussion. The red zone will allow indoor dining and other various personal care services to open up that are not allowed to in the gray zone. Reporting live from Alex Bloomfield.
Which one's gray?
Extension on renewing plate stickers, health cards, and driver's licenses still effective to the pandemic. But when you do renew at least your stickers, you'll be on the hook for not only this year, but also last year if you're going year by year. 6 Cities Phil Martino joins us with some news you can use. Phil.
James, that's right. The extension continues. Products that expired on or after March 1st of last year have an extended expiry date until further notice, and this includes your license plate sticker, driver's license, and health card. Ontario is also temporarily waiving the driver's license renewal requirements for seniors aged 80 and over so they can renew online. Also waive the requirement for people to update their driver's license photo. Now, despite the extension, the Ministry of Transportation says it strongly encourages everyone to renew their driver's license and license plate stickers online where possible. Now, keep in mind, according to the ministry, if you do renew your Ontario driver vehicle Ontario products today, you will be required to pay for the past year. Phil Martino, 6
I can't pay my tickets,
in
I'm not
Ottawa,
gonna
the
renew it.
Manitoba man who stormed Rideau Hall with loaded
Oh.
guns looking for the Prime Minister has been handed a 6-year sentence by a judge.